There's also a song missing from this album that I refuse to write. It's about Donald Trump. According to the Wall Street Journal on November 16, 2019, since taking office, President Trump has criticised Ukraine for corruption and expressed sympathy with Russia's historical claim to parts of the country, views that have affected his views of Ukraine. President Trump also withheld military aid to Ukraine out of concern over Ukraine's corruption. Then he also tried to discredit Ukraine by implying it was Ukraine, not Russia, who interfered with the 2016 presidential election. But evidence on election interference points conclusively to Russia, not Ukraine. Can you imagine what will happen to Ukraine if he gets into presidential office again in 2024? There would be no Ukraine. Trump gave Putin the impression that he was sympathetic to the aims of the war. That's why there is no song in this album about Trump. Julia's story. So now I want to talk to you about Julia's story. This narrative is from Julia herself. I live in Pavlograd in the Dnipropetrovsk region of Ukraine. My day started with a 6:15 a.m. call from my husband. It changed my life. Julia, get up, the war started. I hear explosions. I picked up my son and all the things that came to hand, including the cat, and went to a village near to my town where my husband's mother and nephews live. At the same time, my husband joined the territorial defence. The village, Verbovatovka, about 20 kilometres away, was quieter because there were no deafening sirens. However, there was an air of general panic, and sometimes distant explosions were heard. And as there were no bomb shelters, we hid in basements. Every day started by calling family and friends and asking, "How are you?" In Ukraine, the question, "How are you?" equates with "I love you," because everyone starts the day by calling everyone they love. As the situation deteriorated, we realised that the war would not end quickly and became more scared. My biggest fear was for my son, my little emu, who's just 4 years old. So then I went to my parents, who live in Lozovaya in the Kharkiv region, a further 40 to 50 kilometres away. But there we ran into new difficulties as one day when we came home from the store, a loud siren sounded, followed by a series of very clear explosions. So we just ran. I then realised I couldn't keep my son safe, and I didn't want him to see all the hardships of war. So I left the cat with my parents, packed a backpack, and drove 4 hours to catch an evacuation train from Lozova to Lviv. There was a lot of fighting and rocket fire en route to Kharkiv, and everyone was very tense. All the cars were full of women and children coming from the Lugansk region, where they'd been living through a war for 8 years. I was lucky to go halfway with my friends. However, the train journey through Kyiv was what I was most afraid of, because it was an evacuation train, and Kyiv was shelled regularly. Approaching Kharkiv train station platform seemed quite normal, even though I could see columns of black smoke in the distance. When the train was on the platform, my son, Mark, sat next to me, and in front of me were 3 women and 6 children from the Lugansk region. Though when on the train I heard 3 bangs. I don't understand what happened, the bangs were right in front of me. I turned my head, and in seconds the whole carriage fell to the floor, and my son was dragged off his seat. He was covered with a blanket, and I immediately fell down to him. As the train moved and left, we were on the floor for at least another hour. We then journeyed another 19 hours, but didn't sleep through worry. Luckily, we reached Lviv calmly. From Lviv, we took a train to Poland. The train was packed, and after leaving the train in Lviv, we queued for a train to Poland for a further 3 hours. We eventually arrived in Przemysl, where we went through Polish customs and onto another train to Katowice. This took 3 more hours. It was a tiring journey, and by night time the next day, Mark was asleep in my arms. The train had no seat, so we shared the luggage car with others. It was our second night on the road, and as I hadn't slept for a day, I just sobbed with fatigue. Mark managed 3 hours sleep. We stayed 3 to 4 hours in Katowice, and the volunteers put us on the next train to Gdansk. And thanks to the Polish volunteers, we had some rest and regained some senses. After 7 more hours, I met my brother. Meanwhile, Mark passed out on the train and woke up at my brother's home, all the time asking, do we need to go further? He was already afraid of trains. The overall trip was just awful, and it took me a long time to recover from it. With the fatigue and insanity, you think, what is this all for? But then you remember that you're not just going to visit, you run. You just run away from war, and you just want to live. Live in a world where you're not afraid to go out. You want to live where you're not afraid. And this helped me get through. I met only good people on my journey, helpful, understanding and caring people. And I am incredibly grateful for that. My relatives remain in Ukraine, and I worry about them. I'm very worried about Ukraine and my husband, who has been hospitalised twice, and all the guys who had to fight to protect us all. Everyone hopes and waits for the war to be over so they can go home. Summing up. This story started through concern for Julia. I then researched Eastern European history, trying to figure out what this war was about. I discovered what Ukraine was and is. Historically overrun by Poland, Russia, Austro-Hungarian Empire and the rest. Though the only way I could understand it was from the perspective of 1991, when the world nations accepted the borders defined after the fall of the Soviet Union. Then everyone was all full of hope. On reflection, is the war about Russia's fear that Ukraine is overrun by Nazis? Is it about oil and gas, national pride, or simply megalomania by someone with a big chip on his shoulder? Is it about the encroachment of NATO, or a few or all of these issues? Ask these questions to Ukrainian mothers watching Russian missiles heading straight at them and their families. Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, NPT. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Ukraine held about 1/3 of the Soviet nuclear arsenal, the third largest in the world at the time. On the 5th of December 1994, the Budapest Memorandum on Security Assurances, signed by the Russian Federation, the United Kingdom and the United States, committed them from threatening or using military force or economic coercion against Ukraine, except in self-defence or otherwise in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. It also committed them to support the country in the event of attack. As a result of other agreements and memorandums signed between 1993 and 1996, Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons. I just thought you'd like to know. Putin's daughter, Wikipedia. In 2013, Katerina Vladimirovna Tikhonova, daughter of Vladimir Putin and Lyudmila Putina, married businessman Kirill Shemelov. In January 2018, Bloomberg News reported that Tikhonova and Shemelov had separated. She reportedly has a daughter born in 2017 with ballet dancer Igor Zelensky.